In the previous lesson, what we did was introduce the subject of public law. We took an introduction to public law, sometimes described as constitutional and administrative law. And this lesson, what we're going to do is talk about the question of constitution. Talk about what it is to call something a constitution. What is a constitution specifically? Now, this is a question that we explored previously. We had a look at in the last lesson, very briefly at least. This lesson is going to be a little bit more detailed and refined in terms of coming up with some more substantive definitional requirements. So, essentially, like I said, we outlined a basic definition in the previous lesson. But this lesson is going to be a little bit more detailed. We're going to look at the nature of a constitution in more detail in this lesson, as well as look at what the subject of constitutional law actually involves, what it studies. So this question then, what is a constitution? We remember from the previous lesson that a constitution is simply some kind of entity, some kind of document, or some kind of set of rules and procedures which lays down the fundamental principles which govern some kind of organizational structure. And we noted as well from the previous lesson that the reason why this is quite a broad and quite vague definition of what a constitution entails is because of the fact that constitutions can apply to various different organizational structures. So, for example, we have different areas of what a constitution, or at least different areas of study where we can find ourselves constitutions. We have the constitution of a state. You can have the constitution of an international organization. You could argue, for example, the UN Charter as being one of those, or the ICSID Convention, for example. And you also have constitutions of private organizations, so the constitutions of a company or a corporation. Now, Lord Bingham outlines what he believes to be the requirements for the existence of a constitution in the case of our Secretary of State for the Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. This is the Quark Fishing Limited case from 2006. And in this case, he says that any constitution, whether of a state, a trade union, a college, a club, or other institution, seeks to lay down and define the main offices in which authority is vested and the powers which may be exercised or not exercised by the holders of those offices. So this brings us to further indications as to where a constitution may be able to exist. We can also think about the constitution of a trade union or a college or a club, or for those who are just starting out university, a constitution of a university society, for example. All of these things represent a constitution in that regard. And so in this definition, we can see what the purpose of a constitution is as well. We see that a constitution, seeks to lay down and define the main offices in which the authority is vested and the powers which may be exercised or potentially not exercised by the holders of those offices. And so in application of this to the state, when we're talking about constitutional law in the context of the UK's constitution, one can see the kind of things which one may study within the broader remit of constitutional law. And so this brings us to constitutional law. While constitutional law is particularly broad in terms of its study and the kind of things that are to be studied, one which does not have a specified definition either, we can see that constitutional law may address some of the following issues. Now, depending on whereabouts you go to university, or even potentially which textbook you purchase, you may get a textbook in constitutional and administrative law, or maybe a textbook in public law. They are both basically referring to the same thing. Public law often covers the Constitution and then the administrative processes that exist therein. So constitutional law seeks to address some of the following issues: the structure of government, the way in which the UK government is structured and operates, as well as the relationship between different branches of the government. The relationship between the government and the people. This includes the accountability to the people through democratic means, as well as through human rights processes. The relationship between the government and external international institutions. So the relationship between the government and the UK government, for example, and the European Union, which we were formerly a member of, or even the way in which treaty law is operationalized within the UK's constitutional framework. On the other hand, we then have, and we will turn to, administrative law in future lessons' time. Now, just like with constitutional law, administrative law is also quite a difficult subject to accurately delimit, as in to clearly cordon off what is exactly administrative law. And administrative law is similar to that of constitutional law in the sense that it also speaks about the relationship between the state and the people. And so, what administrative law is often said to deal with is specific and particular functions of government and looks to regulate numerous disputes which may be had between government institutions, so sort of intra-institutional disputes, or even between government institutions and that of the people. So, the ways in which you can actually go through various judicial processes to hold the government to account for their actions. And so administrative law is very important for the purposes of, for example, judicial review, which we will get to in future lessons. In terms of finding a distinction and the similarities between these two areas of law, when it comes to broadly defining them, there are indeed distinctions which can be made. So, for example, the constitutional law, which we're going to be beginning with, looks to explain and analyze the foundations and institutional nature which will then therefore structure and govern the state itself. And then administrative law will look to check and regulate the exercise of government power. So they are broadly connected in numerous different ways, but there are also very clear significant distinctions that can be seen with these as well. And this really brings us to the next of our questions, which is going to look a little bit at some ideas relating to the types of constitution which can exist and the principles that are codified as a result of the type of constitutions which exist as well. And this gets us into looking at some of the ideas of constitutional theory in a little bit more detail.